It took less than 20 seconds. On a frigid December evening, a bridge that had stood for 40 years, a lifeline of steel connecting two states, just vanished. It folded into the icy Ohio River like a house of cards, taking cars, families, and futures with it. In the chaos and grief that followed, a single, terrifying question started to bubble to the surface, whispered at first, then shouted. A question that tied one of America's worst structural failures to a monster. Was the winged, red-eyed creature that stalked this town for 13 months a demon that caused the disaster? Or was it a prophet desperately trying to warn them? This is the story of the day the Mothman prophecy came true. Imagine a monster that isn't just a story. Imagine it's a headline. For 13 straight months, the town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, lived in the shadow of a 7-foot-tall, winged creature with glowing red eyes. They called it the Mothman. Then, on December 15, 1967, the Silver Bridge, the town's main artery, collapsed into the Ohio River, killing 46 people in the middle of rush hour. And just like that, the sightings stopped. The creature was gone. Was it just a coincidence? Or was the final, terrible chapter of the Mothman's story written in the twisted steel and freezing water of that river? The official report blames a tiny, invisible crack in a single steel bar. But for the people who lived through the year of the Mothman, the truth is far more complex and a whole lot scarier. The story of the Mothman doesn't start with a roar. It starts with a quiet, creeping dread on a lonely country road. It begins on November 12, 1966, in a place that feels like it was ripped from a Gothic novel, a cemetery near Clendenin, West Virginia. 5 men, all gravediggers, were finishing up for the day. As dusk settled in, something moved in the trees above them. It wasn't a bird. It was big, brown, and looked unervingly human, but it vaulted from tree to tree with a grace that wasn't natural. The men, used to the solemn quiet of their work, were shaken. They'd seen something that defied all explanation. Their story was just the first strange stone in an avalanche that was about to bury the entire region. 3 nights later, the real nightmare began. The setting couldn't have been creepier. A sprawling, abandoned patch of wilderness on the edge of Point Pleasant known as the TNT area. During World War II, this place was a massive munitions plant, a maze of roads connecting concrete igloos full of high explosives. By 1966, it was a ghost land of decaying buildings and overgrown paths, a place where the line between our world and another felt dangerously thin. Driving into this desolate landscape were 2 young married couples, Roger and Linda Scarberry, and Steve and Mary Millette. They weren't looking for trouble, just trying to escape the boredom of a Tuesday night in a small town. As their Chevy cruised through the TNT area, their headlights cut through the dark and landed on a figure standing near an old power plant. It wasn't a man. It stood 6 or 7 feet tall, grayish in color, with a powerful build. It didn't seem to have a head, but where its neck should have been, 2 enormous red eyes, about 2 inches wide and 6 inches apart, stared right back at them. These weren't animal eyes. Linda Scarberry later said they were hypnotic, both mesmerizing and terrifying. As the 4 of them sat frozen in horror, a pair of huge wings, folded against its back like a cloak, started to unfurl. Roger Scarberry, a man who would later tell the press, "I'm a hard guy to scare," slammed his foot on the accelerator. Pure panic. The Chevy fishtailed on the gravel as Scarberry gunned it toward the main highway. But they weren't alone. Looking back, they saw the creature had launched itself into the air. Its massive 10-foot wingspan carried it effortlessly above them. It didn't flap its wings like a bird. It just glided, a dark shape against the night sky, easily keeping pace with their car even as the speedometer hit 100 miles per hour. They heard a high-pitched squeaking sound, like a giant mouse, cutting through the roar of their engine. The terrifying chase continued all the way to the Point Pleasant city limits. Only then did the creature peel away, vanishing back into the darkness. Shaken and breathless, The two couples drove straight to the courthouse and burst in to find Deputy Sheriff Millard Halstead. They told him their impossible story, and their raw terror was so genuine it convinced the deputy this wasn't some prank. He knew the Scarberries. They weren't the type to make things up. He followed Roger back out to the TNT area, but they found nothing. No tracks, no sign of the creature. Just a dead silence where, minutes before, there had been a monster. That same night, about 90 miles away in Salem, a man named Newell Partridge had his own brush with the bizarre. He was watching TV when the screen suddenly went black, replaced by a strange, swirling pattern. At the same time, a loud whining sound rose and fell outside. His German shepherd, Bandit, started howling on the porch. Partridge grabbed a flashlight and went out. As his light beam cut through the darkness, it landed on two glowing red circles, like bicycle reflectors. Bandit, a loyal and protective dog, shot off the porch like a bullet, straight at the eyes. Partridge waited. The dog never came back. He never saw Bandit again. He spent the rest of his life convinced that whatever was out there in the dark had taken his dog. The next day, the local paper, the Point Pleasant Register, ran a story that changed everything. The headline screamed, "Couples see man-sized bird. Creature. Something." The story was out. The town of Point Pleasant was about to learn they weren't alone. The 13 months of fear had just begun. That newspaper headline was like a match in a dry forest. What might have been a one-off, weird story exploded into a regional phenomenon. Suddenly, the Scarberries and Millet's experience gave a name and a shape to the fear settling over the Ohio Valley. The floodgates opened. It felt like everyone had a story. Over the next few days, sightings multiplied. 2 volunteer firemen saw a large bird with red eyes. A terrifyingly consistent picture began to emerge. A tall, man-like figure, a massive wingspan, and, worst of all, those glowing, hypnotic red eyes. A copy editor, in a nod to the popular Batman TV series, jokingly called it Mothman. The name stuck, adding a layer of camp to something that felt anything but funny to the people living through it. The TNT area became ground zero, a magnet for both the curious and the terrified. Teenagers and thrill seekers would drive down its dark, winding roads, hoping for a glimpse of the creature. Many got more than they bargained for. People reported seeing it perched on the old munitions igloos, its red eyes glowing down at them. Others told stories of it chasing their cars, just like the Scarberries, its silent wings easily keeping pace as they fled. But the sightings weren't just in the TNT area. The creature started showing up in people's backyards, lurking near their homes. A woman named Marcella Bennett was visiting friends when she saw it rise up from behind her parked car. She described a large, gray figure with glowing red eyes. Frozen in fear, she actually dropped her infant daughter. She remembered being hit by a wave of pure, paralyzing dread, a feeling that came up again and again in witness stories. She managed to grab her child and run into the house as the creature shuffled on the porch behind her. The fear in Point Pleasant was something you could taste. It was a small town, and bad news traveled fast. Parents held their kids a little closer. The familiar woods and dark country roads suddenly seemed sinister. The Mothman wasn't just a monster. It felt like a violation of the town's safety. This dread was cranked up even higher by other strange things happening at the same time. Reports of UFOs and strange lights in the sky skyrocketed. People talked about their TVs and radios going haywire, of weird metallic sounds, and phone calls with nothing on the other end but a bizarre, electronic screech. Into this storm of paranoia walked a man named John Keel. Keel wasn't a local. He was an author and paranormal investigator from New York who had come to West Virginia to look into UFO reports. He quickly got sucked into the Mothman story. He moved into Point Pleasant and began a deep, obsessive investigation, interviewing hundreds of witnesses and trying to piece the puzzle together. Keel wasn't some wide-eyed believer. He was a cynical journalist, a seasoned investigator, and he couldn't ignore the consistency in the witness reports. These weren't vague ghost stories. People were describing the same specific details over and over: the height, the wingspan, the lack of a head, and always those eyes. He talked to housewives, factory workers, and cops, collecting stories of the creature peeking into windows and landing on the roofs of cars, always bringing with it that feeling of overwhelming terror. Keel's investigation also uncovered a much stranger side to the story. Witnesses claimed they were being harassed by men in black, mysterious, intimidating figures who would show up, ask questions about their sightings, and warn them to keep quiet. They were described as having weird, plastic-like skin and stilted, unnatural speech. Keel himself said he got strange phone calls from someone, or something, calling itself Injured Cold, a voice that knew things about his private life and made cryptic predictions. As 1967 dragged on, the Mothman sightings continued, but the legend was changing. People started to feel that the creature wasn't just a monster, but an omen. That sense of dread that came with seeing it started to feel less like a reaction to the creature itself, and more like a premonition, a warning of some terrible event on the horizon. Mary Heyer, a local newspaper reporter who worked with Keel, had a terrifyingly vivid dream of people drowning in the river, their bodies floating among Christmas presents in the icy water. The feeling was inescapable. Something awful was coming to Point Pleasant. The town, already living in the shadow of a monster, was now holding its breath, waiting for a disaster they couldn't name. They wouldn't have to wait long. For 13 months, the Mothman had been a mystery. But on a cold December day, the prophecy, whatever it was, would finally be fulfilled, not in the dark woods of the TNT area, but in the heart of the town, in a cascade of falling steel. December 15th, 1967, was a Friday. The Christmas season was in full swing, and the streets of Point Pleasant and its neighbor across the river, Gallipolis, Ohio, were packed. The Silver Bridge, an iconic local landmark, was clogged with the heavy, slow-moving grind of rush-hour traffic. For nearly 40 years, that bridge had been the artery connecting the two towns, a vital link for work, family, and life. It got its name from its unique, shimmering aluminum paint, the first of its kind. It was a point of pride. But the bridge, built in 1928, had a problem. It was an I-bar suspension bridge, a design that used chains of long steel bars instead of traditional cables. It was built for the cars of the 1920s, like the Ford Model T, which weighed about 1,500 pounds. By 1967, the average family car weighed over 4,000 pounds, not to mention the heavy truck traffic the bridge now carried. It had passed inspections, but it was being pushed far beyond its original limits. Still, nobody thought it was in any real danger. Around 5 p.m., as daylight started to fade, the bridge was packed bumper to bumper. The cold air was thick with exhaust fumes. Suddenly, a sound like a rifle shot cracked through the evening. It was sharp, loud, and final. For a split second, there was just stunned silence. Then, with a groan of protesting metal, the whole bridge began to move. Witnesses on the shore watched in disbelief as the entire structure seemed to shiver. They said it folded like a deck of cards. In less than 20 seconds, the proud, silver span buckled and plunged violently into the frigid, murky Ohio River. 31 vehicles went down with it. Cars, trucks, and the people inside were swallowed by the icy water in an instant. The sounds of twisting steel and shattering glass gave way to the terrifying silence of the river. The scene was pure chaos and tragedy. Rescue boats rushed to the site, but the conditions were horrific. The water was near freezing, and the river's powerful current dragged victims and wreckage downstream. In the end, the human cost was staggering. 46 people died. 2 of their bodies were never found, claimed forever by the river. The Silver Bridge collapse became a national tragedy, a wake-up call about the nation's aging infrastructure. As the town reeled in shock and grief, investigators arrived, determined to find the cause. They painstakingly recovered the bridge's wreckage, laying it out in a field like the bones of some great metal beast, looking for the single point of failure. The answer, when they found it, was almost unbelievably small. The entire disaster was traced back to a single eyebar, number 330, on the Ohio side of the bridge. A tiny stress crack, only about 1/10 of an inch deep, had formed inside the eye hole. Over 4 decades, a deadly mix of rust and pressure from ever heavier loads caused this microscopic flaw to grow, hidden deep inside the steel where no inspection could have ever seen it. That evening, under the weight of rush hour traffic, the weakened bar finally snapped. The chain broke, and because of the bridge's design, a total, catastrophic collapse was instant and inevitable. The official cause was clear: an engineering failure, a microscopic flaw with macroscopic consequences. From a scientific standpoint, the mystery was solved. But for the people of Point Pleasant, another, deeper mystery lingered. They had the scientific explanation, but it didn't explain the red-eyed monster that had haunted them for the past year. In the town's memory, the two events became tangled together. Many claimed they saw the Mothman on or near the bridge the very day it fell. And then, after December 15th, the sightings just stopped. The creature was gone. Was it just a horrible coincidence? Or was there a connection? The town was left with a chilling question. Did the monster cause the disaster? Or was it something else entirely? A harbinger of doom, a silent prophet trying to warn them of the unseen crack growing deep in the heart of their bridge. The day the bridge fell was the day the Mothman was cemented in legend, transformed from a local spook story into a modern American prophecy. After the collapse, 2 very different stories emerged. One was a story of science and steel, of stress fractures and engineering. The other was a story of folklore and fear, of prophecies and a winged creature that vanished with the bridge. The official investigation was methodical and clear. The bridge's design had a fatal flaw. The failure of one single link meant the whole thing came down. That tiny, hidden crack was a ticking time bomb, a flaw created by engineering that simply didn't understand the dangers of metal fatigue back in the 1920s. The disaster led to new federal bridge inspection standards, ensuring such a tragedy wouldn't happen again. For the government, the case was closed. But in Point Pleasant, and in the mind of John Keel, the case was wide open. Keel's 1975 book, The Mothman Prophecies, wove the sightings, the UFOs, the men in black, and the collapse into a single, terrifying narrative. He argued that these things weren't random, they were all connected. He didn't see the Mothman as simply evil. Instead, he proposed a stranger, more unsettling idea. He suggested the creature and all the other weirdness came from what he called an ultra-terrestrial source, beings not from another planet, but from another dimension, living right alongside us. In Keel's view, these beings weren't good or evil, just powerful, and their interactions with our world could be chaotic and tragic. He believed the premonitions, like Mary Hyer's dream, and the cryptic warnings he got from Indrid Cold, were proof that these beings knew the bridge was going to collapse. The Mothman, then, wasn't the cause of the disaster, but a bearer of bad news. Its presence was a warning sign. The people who saw it and felt that overwhelming dread were maybe psychically picking up on its silent, screaming prophecy, a prophecy nobody knew how to read until it was too late. This theory, which paints the Mothman as a tragic, misunderstood messenger, became the most popular take on what happened. Of course, there have always been more down-to-earth explanations. From the very beginning, wildlife experts had a candidate, the sandhill crane. It's a huge bird that can stand nearly as tall as a man, with a 7-foot wingspan. And, most importantly, It has a patch of bright red flesh around its eyes. A sandhill crane, blown off its migration route, would be a strange and terrifying sight to people who'd never seen one before, especially at night. Other skeptics point to a barred owl or a great blue heron. An owl's eyes can reflect light from a car's headlights, creating that glowing red effect. And what about simple pranks? One investigator, Joe Nickel, suggested that some of the sightings could have been hoaxes, like construction workers tying flashlights to balloons to spook people. Then there's the psychological angle, mass hysteria. The 1960s were a time of high anxiety. The Cold War, the space race, and a fascination with UFOs created a culture ready to believe in the extraordinary. The first few sightings, amplified by a sensational press, could have created a feedback loop of fear where every shadow in the woods was twisted into the shape of the Mothman. So you're left with two paths. One path leads to a broken piece of steel and predictable physics. It gives us a clear answer and a way to prevent it from happening again. The other path leads into a wilderness of high strangeness, of red-eyed prophets and psychic premonitions. It offers no easy answers, only a profound and unsettling mystery. Was the Mothman a sandhill crane seen through the lens of fear? Or was it a supernatural messenger whose warnings went unheard? The mystery of the Mothman continues to fascinate and terrify people all over the world. So where do you stand? Was it a case of mistaken identity and mass hysteria? Or was it a genuine supernatural warning from a creature trying to prevent a tragedy? Let us know your theory in the comments. And if you find these dives into the world's greatest unsolved mysteries compelling, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next investigation. The collapse of the Silver Bridge left a permanent scar on Point Pleasant, a shared trauma etched into the town's history. But out of that tragedy, the legend of the Mothman was truly born, transforming from a local spook story into a lasting piece of American folklore. The creature's story is now woven into the town's very identity. In the years that followed, Point Pleasant rebuilt. A new bridge, the Silver Memorial Bridge, stands where the old one fell. But the memory of what happened, and the winged creature tied to it, never went away. John Keel's book kept the story alive, and then the 2002 movie, The Mothman Prophecies, blasted it into global consciousness. What was once a source of terror is now the town's most famous resident. Point Pleasant has leaned into its monster. Every September, the town hosts the Mothman Festival, drawing thousands of tourists and paranormal fans from around the world. In the center of town, there's a striking 12-foot-tall chrome statue of the Mothman, its red eyes staring out over the streets. The Mothman Museum showcases old police reports, newspaper clippings, and props from the movie. The creature is on t-shirts, coffee mugs, and cookies. For Point Pleasant, the Mothman has become a complex symbol, a reminder of a dark past, but also a driver of tourism and a unique cultural landmark. The legacy extends far beyond West Virginia. The Mothman is now one of the world's most famous cryptids. The idea of a creature that shows up before disasters has a powerful appeal. People have claimed to see Mothman-like figures before other tragedies, from Chernobyl to the Fukushima nuclear disaster. The Mothman has become a modern myth, a symbol of our own anxieties and our need to find patterns in chaos. And so we're left with the great, unanswered question: what really happened in Point Pleasant? On one hand, you have science. The explanation for the bridge collapse is sound. There is zero physical evidence to connect a winged creature to a broken piece of steel. The rational explanations for the sightings, a misidentified crane or owl, amplified by mass hysteria, are plausible. From a purely logical view, the case should be closed. But logic can't entirely wash away the sheer number and consistency of the eyewitness accounts from those 13 months. It can't fully explain the palpable sense of dread that so many unconnected people reported feeling. And it can't just dismiss the eerie coincidence of the creature's arrival and its sudden disappearance on the very day of the catastrophe. The Mothman legend endures because it lives in that gray space between fact and folklore, between the known and the unknowable. It's a story where a real, documented tragedy collided with a year of genuine, documented weirdness. You can believe the story of the engineers and the broken steel, or you can believe the story of the witnesses and the red-eyed omen. The truth, maybe, lies somewhere in the murky depths between the two. The legacy of the Mothman isn't about finding an answer. It's about the power of a story. It's about how a community processes trauma and how a legend can give a face to the unthinkable. It reminds us that even in our modern, scientific world, there are still shadows at the edge of town, still mysteries that defy an easy explanation, and still things that make us look over our shoulder on a dark country road. The Mothman's prophecy may have been fulfilled in 1967, but the questions it left behind still haunt us.